Hello! Welcome to this thrilling deep dive into the US voting system. It's a system so clear and straightforward that it requires a 1,950-word essay to explain it. Buckle up. Now you might be thinking, voting, that thing I do while browsing Zillow and ignoring jury duty notices? And yes, sometimes it feels that way. But hold on. The US voting system is kind of a big deal. It's how we choose the people who make decisions about our lives. So over the next few sections, we're going to unpack this whole voting thing. We'll explore its history, its quirks, and why it's more important than a sale at your favorite online retailer. Almost. Let's rewind to the good old days, powdered wigs, declarations of independence, that sort of thing. The era when the United States was just a fledgling nation, trying to figure out what democracy meant. Back then, the US voting system was a bit of an exclusive club. It wasn't the inclusive democracy we think of today. Only white men who owned property could vote. This was a time when land ownership was seen as a sign of vested interest in the community and the nation. That meant women, people of color, and anyone who didn't own land, so like most people, were left out in the cold. The majority of the population had no say in the decisions that affected their lives. Not exactly a shining beacon of democracy, right? It was a system that favored the few over the many. Over time, things slowly started to change. The fight for voting rights became a central issue in American history. The 15th Amendment in 1870 gave African American men the right to vote. In theory at least, Jim Crow laws would make it much harder for Black Americans to vote for decades to come. This was a significant step, but the journey was far from over. Then in 1920, the 19th Amendment finally gave women the right to vote. This was the result of decades of tireless campaigning by suffragettes who believed in equality. And in 1965, the Voting Rights Act aimed to eliminate racial discrimination in voting. Progress. This act was a landmark victory in the civil rights movement, ensuring that all citizens, regardless of race, had the right to vote. It's important to remember this history though, because it reminds us that voting rights are hard-won and always worth fighting for. Each step forward was achieved through immense struggle and sacrifice, and it's a legacy that continues to inspire us today. Now let's talk about the big one, the presidential election. Here's where things get really interesting, and by interesting we mean potentially confusing. You see, in the US we don't directly elect our president. We have this thing called the Electoral College. Think of it like this: imagine voting for your favorite pizza topping, but instead of counting individual votes, they weigh each state's votes differently. So even if pepperoni gets the most votes overall, if anchovies win big in a few key states, anchovies could win the whole pizza party. Democracy, everyone. Okay, let's try to make sense of this Electoral College thing. Each state gets a certain number of electoral votes based on its population. The more people a state has, the more electoral votes it gets. To win the presidency, a candidate needs to snag at least 270 out of 538 electoral votes. But hold on, you might say, what happens if someone gets the most votes overall, but loses the Electoral College? Well, my friend, that's when we enter the world of faithless electors and constitutional crises. Fun times. The Electoral College is a controversial system. Some people argue it gives too much power to a handful of swing states. Others say it protects the interests of smaller states. It's a debate that's likely to continue for, well, probably forever. Section 5, Paper, Pixels, and Postal Votes, the hows of voting. Now that we've tackled the who and the why of voting, let's get practical. It's time to dive into the nitty-gritty details of how you can actually cast your vote. How do you actually cast your vote? Well, it depends on where you live and the options available to you. The US is a land of many voting methods, each with its own quirks and potential for chaos. From traditional paper ballots to high-tech electronic voting machines, the landscape is diverse. Some places use good old-fashioned paper ballots. These are the ones where you get to connect the arrows or fill in the bubbles. It's oddly satisfying and gives a tangible sense of participation. You know, the ones where you get to connect the arrows or fill in the bubbles? It's oddly satisfying. Plus, there's something reassuring about having a physical record of your vote. Other places have embraced the digital age with electronic voting machines. These machines can be incredibly convenient, allowing for quick and easy voting. However, they also come with concerns about security and potential for hacking. The idea of your vote being tampered with can be quite unsettling. And then there's absentee voting, a lifesaver for people who can't make it to the polls on election day. This method allows you to vote from the comfort of your home. This has become increasingly popular, especially in light of, global pandemics and all. It ensures that everyone has the opportunity to vote, regardless of their circumstances. Each method has its pros and cons, and it's important to be informed about the options available to you. Whether you prefer the tactile experience of paper, the efficiency of digital, or the convenience of mail-in, the key is to make your voice heard. So, no matter how you choose to vote, remember that your participation is crucial. Every vote counts, and every method has its place in our democracy. Section 6. Before you vote. Jumping through the hoops of registration. Before you can rock the vote, you have to register to vote. Think of it like signing up for a really important rewards program, but instead of discounts on lattes, you get a say in the future of the country. Each state has its own rules and deadlines for voter registration because why make it easy, right? You can usually register online, by mail, or in person at designated locations. Now you might be thinking, this all seems like a lot of work, and you're not wrong, but hey, democracy is not a spectator sport. Section 7. Your vote, your voice. Why casting a ballot actually matters. Okay, so we've covered the history, the Electoral College, the voting methods, and the registration process. But why does any of this even matter? Here's the thing. Voting is your chance to have a say in how things are run, from your local school board to the White House. It's about choosing the people who will represent your interests and make decisions that affect your life. It's about holding elected officials accountable and making sure your voice is heard. Sure, one vote might feel small, but when millions of people participate, it adds up to something powerful. Section 8. History Lessons from the Ballot Box. A look at pivotal elections. Throughout U.S. history, there have been elections that have fundamentally shaped the nation. These elections weren't just about who won or lost, they were about ideas, movements, and turning points. Think back to 1860, when Abraham Lincoln's election sparked the Civil War, or 1932, when Franklin D. Roosevelt's victory ushered in the New Deal during the Great Depression. And who could forget the 2008 election, when Barack Obama made history as the first African-American president. These elections remind us that our votes are not just about the present, but about the future we want to create. Section 9. The 2000 election, a case study in Electoral College drama. Remember that whole what happens if someone wins the popular vote but loses the Electoral College thing? It's a scenario that has puzzled and frustrated many voters over the years. Well, the 2000 presidential election between George W. Bush and Al Gore was a masterclass in just how messy that can get. It was a night filled with tension, uncertainty, and a roller coaster of emotions for both candidates and their supporters. Gore won the popular vote by over 500,000 votes. This meant that more individual voters across the country preferred him as their president, but Bush won the Electoral College and thus the presidency by the narrowest of margins after a recount in Florida that went on for weeks and involved hanging chads, Supreme Court rulings, and enough political drama to fuel a whole season of the West Wing. The recount process was painstaking, with officials scrutinizing every ballot to determine voter intent. The 2000 election was a stark reminder that the Electoral College can lead to outcomes that don't reflect the will of the majority. It highlighted the complexities and potential flaws in the system where the distribution of electoral votes can outweigh the popular vote. It sparked debates about the fairness and legitimacy of the system that continue to this day. Many people began to question whether the Electoral College was still a suitable method for electing the president in modern times. The controversy surrounding the 2000 election led to calls for reform and even abolition of the Electoral College, with advocates arguing for a more direct democratic process. Section 10. Safeguarding democracy. The importance of informed voting. In a world of misinformation and political spin, it's more important than ever to be an informed voter. Don't just rely on headlines or social media posts. Take the time to research candidates and their stances on the issues. Read different news sources to get a balanced perspective. And remember, critical thinking skills are your best defense against propaganda and fake news. Because here's the thing. Democracy thrives on an informed and engaged citizenry. When people are apathetic or misinformed, it undermines the whole system. Section 11, your civic duty calls, get out there and vote. So there you have it, folks, a crash course in the US voting system. It's complex, it's messy, and it's not without its flaws. But it's also the best system we've got for now. And ultimately, the power to make it work lies in our hands. Or more accurately, our votes. So get registered, stay informed,